Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
Right, this is episode 12 of Watch the Overture. We're back. I know this is actually the bad thing about the Overwatch League, is when the Overwatch League concept was, come up with, and I heard from Monty, like, it's going to be like a season a year, and then the season will take up like the first few months. He sold me on the angle of but the great thing about that is it'll leave so much room for, third-party organisers to make it another circuit, and then people will be really creative with all the stuff they do. And it's like, well, you know what, you were right that there'll be a big gap after the Overwatch League. Not so right about anything filling it, basically. So people are probably wondering why we're even back now. Like, the Overwatch League is still quite a while to go. But we've got a good concept here, which is we're going to do overarching narratives. And we're going to have some that can obviously pick up from Season 1 and go into Season 2. We can have some in Season 2 that's like a player's joining the league that was never in the league, a team's joining a league, a franchise is being created. What we're going to do is we're going to take all of the roster moves, the players on the teams, the storylines from last season, we'll grind them all up and make some delicious bread from making narratives for Season 2. And obviously, to do so, who else would we get but stuchiu, right? Because what people don't realise is stuchiu's actually, I won't say mastered because it's just probably a bit pretentious, but he's become excellent at how to identify a narrative, how to sort of, even in doing so, you've got to figure out which parts of the narrative are like a little bit shaky, like which parts am I based on, like this one tournament now I haven't seen. And then you need to be able to know and be very honest, by the way, in how you update the narrative when it goes to the next tournament and when the next result happens. And what people don't seem to realise, unfortunately, I actually feel bad for you in this sense, stuchiu, is that when you do your articles, they are the ultimate articles for the person who is a fan of the game, does watch esports, but doesn't read like every interview. They haven't watched the game for 10 years. They haven't watched every single match, but they want to know in each game, okay, who are the star players here? What were they doing here? And what's the context of why we're in this game? So in that sense, stuchiu basically does what we're going to do in this episode now for a living. So ideal person to get for the job. And also, unlike 99% of the plebs in esports, he doesn't just follow one esport game or claim to follow more than one esport game and then just say a bunch of bullshit. And then when you pin him down, just go, well, I did used to play Counter-Strike when I was 15. It's like, yeah, brilliant, Sam. Tell me more about who the best team ever was. So let's start out here. I feel like what we should start with is, we'll make it like a mixed bag scenario, like one of those things where you spin a wheel and you pick one like that. I think we should start, just to set the tone, with a carryover narrative. One that isn't like totally fresh. They don't have to know a player they've never seen play before, or a franchise they're not sure about the backing of and stuff. Let's take a narrative that comes from Season 1. Let's make it a big one that you actually think either will carry straight over into Season 2 and we can just go straight on, and see like the next episode. It's like, at the end of a season of a TV show, it's like, you come into the second season, you want to see what's going to happen in that storyline, except obviously they just tease the fuck out of you. They never go straight to like the cliffhanger at the end of the season, do they? I always say this, the cliffhanger at the end of the season is like main character 1 versus main character 2. Literally, one of them swings a sword. It's about to chop the other guy's head off. Season 2 always begins. The guy who's about to have his head chopped off is just like, he's just on the campus somewhere, and it's like 3 months later, and it's not until halfway into the episode that someone even says like, hey, remember how that ended where that guy swung? You don't even get to find out the actual narrative. So either it's one of those, or it's got to be one where it's a big narrative from Season 1 and it's morphed. Like you think because of player changes or something that's happened in maybe more franchise, it's going to change. So Yiska, do us the honours. Pick a big narrative that you like from Season 1 and tell us how you think it will change for Season 2, or continue.
Well, I guess one of those would be the continued torment of Fleda, the deadlifter.
Yes.
Of
Star
course.
DPS of the Soul Dynasty, of course.
Exactly. Like going from a very bad team in the Apex era, Fleshlux, who never won a best of series in that format, then went to the Soul Dynasty, actually won Soul Cup, so he sort of has his win there, though that's not a big one. And then he went to the Overwatch League and everyone thought, okay, this is the breakout. Here finding us a team who can do it. Turns out, once again, he's the best player on that team. And especially in stage 1, it looked lonely at the top for him in that regard. A lot of the old teammates he had on that team that were considered very good, not sure if world-class at that point anymore, like Miro, like Roger Hong, like Toby, they all underperformed in Season 1. And now we see that at least Miro is gone. And so this team has refueled for season 3 of we're going to torment Fleda. But this time around, it might actually work out, because what they have done is they have gotten 2 rather unknown players in Marvel and Michelle, who, most interestingly, also are starting currently over Fischer in scrims. And that's an interesting...
Oh, boy.
Oh
boy. So what you basically doing, Yiska, is, because I was wondering how is he going to get to this, because no matter what you said there, I was going to say at the end, well, to be fair, haven't they just signed one of the best tanks, a tank that believes in the vision of, tank and DPS synergy, and that's basically, was one of the main secrets to having success in season 1, as evidenced by the London Spitfire, as evidenced by the LA Gladiators. But no, what you did was you drew it out there with all the stuff about Fleta, and then you only at the end drop the bombshell that the one man who could have helped him is basically might not even be in the server.
I give you one more. Jae-Hong is currently not starting on flex support. So this team is a mixed box of skills, but then again, what they have gotten, and that's the one positive thing, I'm hearing very good things about Jackson. Apparently, one of the genius shot callers from the Korean region. And that, a lot of people just have the opinion about this player that he might be the pickup of the season, just in the way how he shapes teams' performances. And in that sense, maybe it makes then sense to not have those ego players in there that think, for Fischer, you see what you get basically with him. He demanded a playstyle for Los Angeles Gladiators, had to get a lot of resources there, but also made it work. I'm not sure if that playstyle would continue working next season simply because of the current meta we have. And of course, we don't know what the meta will bring, but maybe that is a consideration here. Also, interestingly, I have no idea why not, but he's currently not listed on the official team page for Seoul. So it's, that storyline will be very interesting to see. Also, how many of the other redemption arcs, if you want, in Ru Jae-Hong and Toby I actually get to play, because at least for Lucio, this hero is once again in the meta, and Toby, of course, one of the historically best Lucios in the game, should get his chance. But then again, Jexa is there, and maybe shot calling is too important.
I mean, I definitely like that as a narrative, by the way, because one thing I'll pick that up and kind of take the baton and add a little bit myself of a narrative that I think fits into that as a sub narrative, which is, I think, the most overrated concept in all of esports, all team esports that I've ever followed, is the idea of we'll just train a shot caller. You can do it. You do it over here. It reminds me actually of a video I watched which talked about the history of field goal kicking in the NFL, where it's such a specialist skill. You only come out to kick the field goal or you kick the punt, right? You don't play in any of the rest of the game. You're not on defense. You're not on offense. That's it, right? Well, in the olden days, basically, no one actually stopped to think what impact a field goal had. And so there were no specialists. In fact, there was even a famous guy who was a quarterback who used to also kick the field goals. There was some guy who played offensive line and kicked the field. No one figured out, if this thing is such a specialist skill, but if you had the best at doing this, then it would be incredible. And so that's why, if you look at the stats, the reason the stats go up and up and up and up and up, whereas, for example, in sports like basketball, it's not the shooting percentages go insanely up over the 30, 40 year span. Some of them stay similar to none. It's just because people figured out it's a specialist skill and you have to do that your whole life, basically. I've found in esports, the only reason people get away with that logic of anyone could shot caller, hey, I'll be the shot caller now, or hey, you can train me up, is just because, this will sound counterintuitive, good shot callers are so godlike that they are incredibly thin on the ground. In every team game I've ever seen, I'm not joking, you sometimes get 5 godlike shot callers in the entire fucking global scene. Now, those people, no joke, success just follows these motherfuckers around. It's they can trip over and make top 4 at a massive tournament no matter what their team is. Meanwhile, we all know you can have good players and sometimes nothing happens, I mean, some of the teams in the Overwatch League, like Seoul Dynasty, are a decent example of that, even though, yes, some of them fell off. So personally, I'm a massive believer that when you find a really good shot caller, like, you hold on to them and you set things up to fit how they would do things. Fits many different games. I won't give too many other examples from other games because people might not have any clue who they are, etc. But I would say as a result, that alone could be a really great positive. Like, if this guy really is legit, because for me, the great thing about a good shot caller is not only will he get like all your team on the same page, but he can do what is impossible without a good shot caller, which is he could potentially make a player who's average seem better. Whereas if you don't have a good shot caller, you can have the opposite. You can have an amazing player just look good. Like, that's the difference for me in that one. So obviously in the past, we wanted that to be Ryu Jihong. We wanted him to do that role, but for some reason he couldn't do it in Overwatch Season 1. So as much as that one seems like a cock tease that he's not going to be starting, maybe that's the saving grace. Like, I'll hold out some hope for that. I'll give them sort of like a 10% chance that might actually be amazing.
Mm-hmm. All right. So building on that shot caller idea, I don't really know what this guy does, but I do know Fisher. And if I had to describe his shot calling style, he's essentially Nico from Counter-Strike. He's like, if basically a superstar player, play around me, get on my back, we'll win this game. That's essentially what he's doing. Whereas if you're looking at like all-time great shot callers, doesn't matter which game you're talking about, but I'll go with Dota 2 because that's the game that loves its leaders the most. Like, it awards them the most, right? Basically, these guys literally pull out people from nowhere and like win TI, get top fours at major international tournaments. PPD made CCNC somehow look good for like an entire year. So like, these guys are absolutely amazing in what they do. And like, the whole point I'm bringing about for Dota 2 is like, they never fell into that trap because of the draft, as in like nobody ever believed they could truly be like a great in-game leader at the outset. The only time you see somebody do it is because they literally have no choice. Whereas like CSGO, like a superstar player might think, oh, maybe I'll try, and then they fail. In League of Legends, all the orgs convince themselves, you know what, maybe we can somehow organizationally do this, and then they fail. In Dota 2, it's like, no, you get the in-game leader or you die. So if he's that guy, then I think that might save Dynasty, because I was really down on them until after you told me about the Fisher thing. But if this guy's legit, then yeah.
Yep.
Because like, that's one of the things again, maybe we can make this another storyline that comes from Season 1. Like, going into Season 1 of the Overwatch League, like a lot of people, if you've watched Apex, you think to yourself, right, the teams that have got all the really sick players from Korea, they're just easily going to win all the time, you know, and like, how would anyone beat them? They're so fucking sick, these players. But I have to say, the main theme that came out of Season 1 in terms of like stylistic aspects for the Overwatch League was ignoring teams that literally were like boosted or crippled by the meta. It was basically based around like who had the best ability to react as a team when things happened. Like, if you were the ones who could make the shot call that was like, here's the correct thing to do, and then other people follow the shot call, which is a key part, obviously. These were the teams that seemed to do the best, as far as I could tell. Like, it didn't actually even always matter player strength. Like, I know everyone was giving a lot of praise to those Boston Uprising players when they had all the undefeated streak. I'm not going to lie, I never thought they had even vaguely the most talented team in the league. Like, I thought they had a couple of players who were amazing. Sadly, actually lost one of those players, but people obviously ignored that context because of the external stuff. But they seemed to be all on the fucking same page, and they had exactly the same playing style in mind. And sure, it was one-dimensional, but they were amazing at that one-dimensional playing style. You know, it was unbelievable. They could beat teams who did the same playing style and had better players. It's baller as fuck.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that despite like the environment and everything, that this clicked so well in stage 3 especially. And I have to say though, like, not to take too much away from them, it was a stage where a lot of teams seemed deflated, especially NYXL and London for that time, where they would try to ramp it up towards the end of the season. But yeah, like,
that was when people hit the wall.
Yeah, I mean, in that regard, that is also, by the way, an interesting thing here. Because this is one thing which people, I think, massively overvalue, is like, okay, so Boston obviously had an unexpectedly amazing season for the sure. resources that they had and whatever. Now, a lot of people give a lot of resources towards Krusty for this, or even whoever helped with assembling that roster. Now that Krusty is gone, it seems to me that a lot of people are undervaluing whatever the system is that Boston has that made it so. It could be that a high percentage of that was Krusty. It is just not very likely for that to be the case. It's possible that other people that are on Boston, including Huck and whatever, Mr. Bleepo, or these other coaches that remain there, or even players, have that eye for talent, and it's not strictly impossible that they found the diamonds in the rough once again. And seeing, not giving them the benefit of the doubt, and I think there has to be considered rationally a residual quality of the old Boston in that, because it's not 100% of Boston gone. I think largely the system is still the same. I think it's outrageous that people put them last place, simply based on pound for pound comparisons. Even then, they still have Aim God, they still have Note, and they still have Gamsu. So that team is not garbage.
But basically, okay, what about this then? Is a way to reformulate the narrative for them is we really are running back the same narrative. It's like, right, has Boston again, because they obviously got a lot of people who aren't big names and haven't got a history in top level Overwatch. Have they, by applying the same strategy, which, listen, fair play, if Huck really wants to build that narrative that he's like the Bill Belichick, he's going the same approach, he's not going out and buying the big free agents. He hasn't gone and got some superstar DPS player that everyone wanted in the league, He hasn't gone and got a load of extra Koreans and spammed them in his... He's gone and got these people where if these people work out, he will again get lots of the credit. I mean, you're right, the Krusty scenario siphoned off a lot of that credit, but I feel like this would rebuild that narrative entirely. In fact, how could you... I'd even have to say I'd give it a lot of weight if they have success here. I mean, here's the question then, along with that narrative though. What would be success that would warrant us giving him the credit for that as his vision, or putting the team together, or having a system in play? What do you think would be a good enough sort of accomplishment? It doesn't have to be win the Overwatch League, obviously. That's a bit too much, but what do you think would be appropriate?
I think with the competitiveness of the league overall, and I think the level of play will be much higher than it was in season 1, because basically all the best talent is inside the Overwatch League now. I think if he makes it into those play-in tournaments, which is basically 12th spot, that's definitely enough proof for me that Huck's system works.
Okay. Okay, I've got a narrative for you, and this is a brand new narrative. So the narrative for the Florida Mayhem from season 1 was basically you all remember that Misfits team that underperformed fucking all those Apex tournaments, right? They're back, and they're even worse. And then also, obviously, it had those sub-narratives of they only had 6 players, the minimum you could have, so they had no subs. And they also clearly didn't want to spend big money early on. And also, initially, naively, along with the Misfits idea, we're trying to keep it Swedish or vaguely Nordic in some sense, It's only at the bitter end of utter failure that they just buckled and literally did everything against the antithesis of everything they'd done before by just signing Sire player, literally putting them on Widowmaker and saying, listen, we're still going to lose all the games, but shoot people in the head and look really good while we lose the games. It's it was almost the most genius, futile move at the end. But this is why it could actually, in the end, have been interesting, because they've obviously retained Sire player. They kept Tavik, who was, even though he wasn't that great in the season 1, he's considered a great player. People thought maybe he would have a chance on another team. And they've pivoted and they've gone almost all Korean. And even so, they've gone and got some players you will know. They've got Zephyr, they've got Hagapun, they've got people you've actually seen before. Some of which, Hagapun was a pretty decent player when he was playing. These aren't joke players, What do you think about this one, Yiska? How would he formulate the narrative for Florida Mayhem here? Can you just buy Koreans and win? Is that it?
I mean, first, I would probably disagree, even though that's not a common point. I think Hagapun absolutely is a tier 3 Korean talent. He was one of the GC Busan people, but I had this thing going. I would basically rage whenever London would put in the thing that I called the phonetic Triple H in Huyal, Hagopyeon, and Hureg. Hureg probably the worst player on that. He somehow made it back into the Overwatch League on the back of the pink unicorn. But yeah, Hagopyeon, I don't that might be the worst Korean flex support in the league. Then they somehow found that guy. Zephyr was a bench player for a non-playoff team, and keep in mind, like half the league made it to playoffs last season. Swan. That is a name also because he renamed. I think his name was previously Butcher. That's a guy that's probably a little bit underrated here. Awesome guy, my lord. That guy was a problem in season 1. And then BQB. Okay, this could actually be someone that doesn't make it look like it's a Flashluxe simulator for Sire player there.
So wait a minute, it's actually okay. Fair enough. By the way, I'll totally give it up. I don't clearly know everything about all the players in the Overwatch League. Is it the opposite story then? Basically the story of the Florida Mayhem is before they thought you can win without Koreans and you just need everyone to have the same nationality. Now it's like, well, you can't just buy Koreans, dude. Like you have to actually also make a team. Like you can't just get people who are Korean and win.
No, this is a very good case study that you can lose with Koreans, I think.
Right. Which is hard to do, fair play to him. That sort of takes some sort of anti-Huck level genius.
I don't know apparently they're calling in English. And
okay. Reasonable.
I guess they saw
just for degree of difficulty.
Dragons was all right.
Exactly. Just make it a bit harder as well.
I mean, they do have a Fly who's a two-way player. But yeah, I have no idea what Tivik actually does on the team, if it's just like a coaching thing. And this is also an undervalued thing. A lot of the players that remained on the Overwatch League rosters that don't quite make sense. There's like 3 guys for 1 slot. That is mostly because they triggered their 1+1 and they tried to sell them, but nobody would shell out what they wanted for them. And I'm not sure if that's the case for Tivik, but it is the case very often.
Could actually just be stuck on the bench, basically.
Yes, that is possible. Though I have to say, I think Tivik has enough say in the Mayhem organization that I think one thing that we always have to say about Tivik is he was very honest with his own ability, and then also he's quite stoic about gameplay. Like whenever there's a cheese meta, he's not the one that complains and just practices through it. And I can see him just saying, okay, if I'm not the best solution for the team, I might as well help them in some other regard. It is actually, I think it's sort of a shame that he's stuck on this team, because I legitimately think if he had gone to a Paris team or whatever, he could have been probably better than, for instance, Shadowburn. So yeah, I'm not sure what he's doing on that team. It's possible he's just moving into a coaching role there.
Okay.
Yeah,
go on.
Okay, if I had to compare this team to an esports historical figure or whatever, I'd say this is a super Tivik's career so far in Florida Mayhem and before then and now is some fucked up version of what S4 did, except S4 is an all-time great player. And what I mean by that is basically S4 won with Alliance for TI3, all Swedish roster. And then he convinced himself, all the Swedes, this will work forever. And then when it finally broke apart, he's like, fuck this. I'm going to go make an all-star team with Puppy.
Yeah.
Right? And then this is kind of what Tivik's done, except on a far lower level. He's like, we're going to go all Swedes, completely failed. He's like, fuck it. I'm going to go all Koreans. And I think this is probably going to fail too. I don't really see, he's basically put himself into a corner. This makes no sense. He's basically making himself the guy you have to cut if this fails.
Right. What is a narrative you want to bring to the table here? Pick one for us.
Who, me?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see here.
Can be a fresh one, obviously. It doesn't have to be one that picks up,
Okay. All right. Do you think... all right, because since Overwatch has so many Korean players, do you think either of the two heavyweights being New York Excel or London Spitfire will actually continue to do well next season? Because if you think about every Korean-based esport, the turnover is fucking crazy. Sure. The amount of players that stay at the top for longer than an year is you can usually count them on one hand.
That's an interesting one. The problem is there's a lot of volatility, but I made my top 20 list, and yeah, I do have London and NYXL as the first slots, mainly because I think a lot of the London issues could be fixed with their new head coach. And with NYXL, I think they are not losing absolute key players. And the one thing that could hurt them, and I'm still not sure, and the jury is still also out on that one, is Wizard Young, obviously moving to Washington. So yeah, I think NYXL also with Flower coming in and whatever that might end up, but also Nene coming in, I think they actually boosted themselves. Like just pound for pound, these two rosters probably are still the best in the league. So, but based on the limited information we have, and also, of course, we don't know what kind of metas will we run. I think, yeah, NYXL and London are very it would probably be foolish to put them outside of the top 4.
The thing that's wild for me about the NYXL lineup is like, obviously I can't know if they'll win like I thought the other one should have. So, I mean, that didn't happen. And to be fair, you obviously can't on paper really know even how a team will look in the game. But if you are someone who's just trying to smash a roster with good players until you have success, they've taken what was already the most overloaded, insane team in the Overwatch League and added some even better players. Yeah. Like, for people who didn't see the Nene guy when he was playing in the Challenger, Contenders they call it in this game, he was like one of the best players on that team he was playing. He was legitimately really good. So it doesn't surprise me they put him in the main team. Like, here's the thing. Obviously, you could fail. But like, if they could, put it this way, if they don't even finish top 4 with this team, I would immediately fire all the coaches. Like, whoever put the team together should probably be fired because on paper, it looks like whoever the GM is, you killed your fucking job again. I already thought you had enough talent where, you're not going to get more people because you think to yourself, there's another factor. You think to yourself, who wants to be the bench player who's really good behind a really good player? Like, I'd rather go and be on another team if I'm a Westerner, Mm-hmm. That's one of the things, that's an area, by the way, I've noticed in esports, especially from like League of Legends and from Overwatch. That is one area that will always be OP as fuck for Korea and never for the West. You will never get someone who is like the 4th best player in the world at his role to sit behind the 1st player in the world at his role if he is from America. That can happen in Korea. I'm not even exaggerating. It's so ridiculous. Partly because they really do have that mentality of like the team is bigger than the player. And like, here's what's mad. The guy who's behind him, even if it's delusional to us, will still be thinking, if I play my hardest and do what the coach says, maybe I can win the spot. It's like, to us, we think like, oh, you poor sweet summer child. It's never going to happen for you, is it? Like, didn't you see Fisher in fucking London Spitfire? He had to get out of there before he could do anything. But like, I have to say, this is an example in this team because the amount of players who are going to have to sit on the bench in some of these games, who should be starting players and really good ones in other teams, is going to be nuts. So if this team doesn't win, I don't even know what to say because like GM job looks amazing.
Yeah.
Looks fucking amazing.
This bench legitimately has a market value that's higher than some of the starting rosters for Overwatch League teams. Just like, Arc will probably not start. That's a bilingual, probably one of the most fluent in English Korean shot callers. That is one of the best main supports. That he will probably not start over Animo. Then you either have to sit on the bench Pine, Flower, Nene, or Sebiobi. Like that's just like nigh a million sitting on the bench, while teams like DC or whatever, of course, like have invested a fraction of that into their active roster. So that's just a crazy deep bench.
Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention the other aspect to that makes it OP as fuck is not only can you, if you choose to, field another world-class player, nobody else can use him. Your rivals can't have that guy. Like, if anything, that's the one area that Jack from Cloud9 didn't figure out. Is like, no. If you can keep him, you idiot. Yeah. He can't go to the other team, can he? It looks a lot better when you win and he's just sat on the bench. And like, it sucks for him, but for everyone else in your team, it's fucking awesome, isn't it? So,
to be fair, he had some smarts behind it, because if you remember, like, Gladiators was one of the worst teams.
He thought he was doing it the right way. I know. Yeah, like, I can't disagree with the judgment at the time, but when you saw the result, obviously you were like, fuck, maybe you shouldn't have done that one, actually.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of people were after Rascal and Fissure as a package deal, but they wouldn't sell him as such. So
yes. Makes sense.
Well, what about this then, Stuchiu? So you raised the topic, you brought up these two teams. Do you have an angle on this one? Like for example, are you concerned about the champion, Spitfire?
Yeah, pretty much. I I think New York Cell is fine just because I always bet on like a guy who has or will continue to probably break the paradigm, which is Jawknock. But for the London Spitfire, I think they essentially like, I don't know if you want to call it luck, but I think like a lot of shit had to happen for them to straight up win. Like a lot of shit had to happen for them to straight up win. And yeah, winning heals all wounds, but that was like 6 months ago. Like they're all good. I think they'll all pop up again. And I don't know anything about this coach to make me think, oh, he'll surely fix this. Like, really? I don't really know. Can anybody know? Like this team essentially went to civil war with each other in like the first season.
I mean, all he needs to do is fix wrist injuries, and I think he's like, if he does that, I think that's a job well done for that team. Because
by the way, in the Overwatch League, injuries are basically the equivalent of where the rock and roll star can't play the concert tonight because he's got a sore throat, which means, he was just doing all the rails and fucking all the bitches in the city. Like, it's always like the fakest excuse ever. So I agree. If you can fix that angle, well, for a start, people can just play the game. That would be brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Though, like, if you had to, like, if I had to say which of those teams more probable to have like a bad season, it's probably London, simply because I think they're new players. Krillin, we don't know anything about that, even though back in my mind, now currently a Refute This episode is running where Stuchiu says Jawknock is going to be sick because he's high on the ladder. Fuck him for that. And then Guard, he was a very good Sombra, but hasn't really shown anything else. And we saw how streaky of a player Birdring is. And I would have liked someone to like basically have this concept of like waves and peaks, waves and tides players. Like just someone that raises the tide slowly and has a very consistent level. Well, like peak players, if you can, or wave players, if you can predict when they are peaking, and you can bring them in then, like for instance a Pine, then they have great utility. I'd rather see Birdring in that role. I'm not sure if Guard is such a tide player in that sense.
Okay. Right, what about this then? So one of the narratives that you did when we were, like, you did the notes for this episode and like came up with some concepts I thought was an interesting one, was like, I'll phrase it like this. Is there going to be another Jawknock in the Overwatch League? Which obviously doesn't mean somebody who does this exact role and plays this exact stuff. What we mean is there like a completely, potentially like league-changing player who could completely transform the fortunes of multiple franchises by who he plays for, who he beats, what he does to the game, who either is like a straight-up rookie or just hasn't yet done that and will emerge in the Overwatch League? Is there someone who you could put forwards or you'd put as a candidate for that? So this is to everyone, honestly.
Sure. So one name, like just a direct comparison. I'm not sure if he will be a paradigm shift, but someone that sort of can fill the shoes, like the sort of form that Jawknock left, could be Violet for sure. He has like the mechanical prowess to do that, and I think also he has the smarts. But in terms of like really defining what we think of Overwatch, one interesting thing, for instance, is Gushev, the Chinese tank, which is basically like we haven't seen a Chinese top of the line player. We simply haven't. Like the best Chinese player in Overwatch League Season 1 was probably Dia, and he was very far away from best player in the DPS role. So
did get an MVP vote though.
Listen, there's a few people who got MVP votes, so we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, in that regard, that is an interesting one. Maybe Jaxe in terms of just ability to shot call.
Sure.
But yeah, I think so. The problem really is and that is the ridiculousness of the narrative that was Jawknock. So just someone completely coming out of nowhere and then redefining what the role of the flex support, or rather Zenyatta, really is. I don't think that's very likely to happen. And I think that's a once in a game's lifetime situation here, where all the different aspects of the Jawknock character just came together and somehow worked out. Now, in terms of just very promising rookies that,
either will be like the best player, but without all the other shit, or just we're good, but and people haven't seen them in Overwatch. Maybe they did play in Apex and they're going to tear it up. Broadening it a bit, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of those names could be. I think he's still called Yakpang on Toronto Defiant, and I think the idea that he has a couple of Apex seasons on his back. The thing is, a lot of people actually think he was the worst player on his former team, and for some reason, I'm friends with Baroy, the analyst for that team, and he's telling me this guy's nuts. Like, this is his crown piece in terms of what kind of a job he does, and I think that, also just looking at the games really with with intent, seeing what Yakpang did, I think there is a possibility that he might put himself into a top 3 tank position, even though Overwatch League is just. I think there is not a tank outside the Overwatch League that should be in. The roster of main tanks is very stacked in the Overwatch League.
Sure. Okay, as bizarre as this might sound, obviously a narrative that began the Overwatch League, as I alluded to before, was the top Korean teams, especially ones that stay together, will just dominate the fucking league and no one will be able to touch them, etc. Now, obviously that did not happen. For anyone who doesn't know, the NYXL team wasn't even the dominant team in Korea ever, had some very good players, and even then was so fundamentally changed by some of the players they added, such as Jawknock. It doesn't even feel fair to even take, even if they'd have won the Overwatch League, I wouldn't have been a dick and be like, see, I told you. It's actually, it was the opposite of what I thought. But when you see the London Spitfire one, people might say, okay, in the end it sort of worked, when they finally found the lineup, etc. But even then, remember, you were merging 2 lineups. You did take players from each lineup. You were good at the beginning, and then you had the big period that was bad. And at the end, you came on strong in the playoffs. So the obvious question is this. Can the team who is next in line to do that, which is Runaway, obviously, who took care of business in Korea, now comes over to the Overwatch League, comes over as a whole team as they wanted to, got all the stuff they wanted, can they be the ones who fulfill the destiny of that narrative? Or what do you think, stuchiu? You think this is actually something that can happen? Are you a believer in that sense? Because here's the thing, I know that unfortunately, as much as a lot of the people who say that if you think Koreans are the best, you're just a blind fanboy or whatever, it's mainly people who don't watch the Korean leagues. I know, so always have that it's like a thing to protect their brain from the idea Koreans are better. As much as they'll say that, it is very tricky not to get caught up in that as a real thing, and even when you're not 100% sure, think, well, they are Korean, so I'll give them the edge, So do you think that they'll do it? Should they do it?
I'm gonna bet against them. Like I said, the easiest way to figure out who's going to be the best is find a guy who's going to break the paradigm, and that guy is still Jawknock for me, or define the paradigm, I guess. But the other problem I have with Runaway is it feels like they're overrated. And what I mean by that is because of the way Overwatch is structured, it's kind of similar to League of Legends in the sense you're either in Overwatch League or you have no interaction with anybody inside of it. If you think of League of Legends, it's basically everybody's in the franchise system and you only interact at MSI, maybe there's 1 team from each region or something, and then at Worlds, right? And then what I noticed with Worlds is somehow every year NA fans are convinced themselves an NA LCS team is going to be great, right? And I feel that's kind of what's happened here, where everybody's convinced themselves oh man, these Runaway guys, they're going to be the best in the league because they've been in Korea for so long. And yeah, they did win it. Yeah, I think they were the best team, probably in contenders. It's not always the case the best team wins.
Sure.
But I think they did win and they were the best. But you're going into a completely different environment and a completely different structure. Those Apex style tournaments are so wildly different from Overwatch League. And I personally think they'll still be very good, but I can't see them as being the one.
Where do you come down on this, Yiska?
So the one property where I think this is a different story than Lunatic High or GC Busan or whatever, is that the core of Haxal, Bumper, and Stitch have been playing together since 2016, and crucially, they've gone through 2 down periods.
Okay.
In their career, so they have that core has bounce back potential.
Okay, I'm going to say this right now. In that case, are we tacking on to this narrative of like, well, the big Korean team who's very good and does very well? Are we adding a sub narrative, which is this is Yiska's make or break on his like core theory, and if this fails, you basically have to give it up and like just admit that like you can throw players together and win from day one. Is that something that's riding on this one? Are you willing to go that far?
Well, yeah, I mean, no.
You know how many years you just said? You just said like they play like 2 years.
I mean, I would say that a lot of GMs have taken that idea and have built around cores now, especially also for the expansion teams, which is interesting. I think there are a lot of like proof of concepts, though. The thing is, what one has to understand also is the off season is so long that it's very easy to create a core during the off season and play in. And but basically this team has like the core is very solid, and especially now with Haxa, having the age thing, and that was sort of like the limitation also almost for Runaway in season 1, I think. And then the guys that come in with their backline, for instance, Twilight and Slime, were the best backline in Korea. So in Contenders Korea, like the guys that are like just substituted into with that core are absolute top notch. I think you could make an argument that Jano is one of the top flex tanks in the world, and I think you can also make an argument that this backline will be one of the best in the world. Now, the other interesting tagline that comes with this is how good is Contenders Korea in comparison to the Overwatch League?
Because obviously that implication will be heavily considered whichever way it goes, right?
Yes, I mean, already so much talent comes from Contenders Korea, and if they are not coming from Contenders Korea, then it's Korean players coming from the Chinese region or the Pacific region. So, but yeah, I think this, especially since Blizzard doesn't seem to like that Contenders Korea is so good in comparison, I think that might turn out into a narrative nightmare for them in that regard, that if Runaway does well, and I absolutely think they will make playoffs, I think that will sting. And I think for the properties of that core, and also I think a coach came with them, the players had a lot of say in like how that entire system will be structured. I think they have an idea how to come back even if they have a downswing. And keep in mind, this team, like, just that's also one property I always consider is how antsy are the owners with spending during the. So, for instance, if you completely shit the bed in stage 1, is your org willing to spend some money in order to come back? And for instance, a team like Dallas, I would say they've proven that, for that to be the case if they can actually let go of players for personal reasons. But like, they are willing to invest, and I think that's also true for the Vancouver core, because why else would you or the Vancouver organization? Because why else would you shell out so much for Runaway? I think there's a possibility they want to bring the Runaway vibe with them, but they also want like the best team they could get for money. And why not, like, if there's an obvious problem, why not just buy the best, talent from Contenders Korea that will be developed by the time the mid-season signing window opens up? Because we will have almost 2 seasons of Contenders Korea by that time. And I can already tell you, there's a lot of talent still in Korea that is absolutely signable. I'm not sure about the eligibility of those players, but yeah, I think if they run into problems early, then they would absolutely fill those holes with substitutions. And yeah, I can't see this team that, like, if this team doesn't make playoffs, it would be a huge upset, I think.
Okay. I mean, I actually think one way I would reformulate the narrative for this particular team, all those other ones are valid. Like, unfortunately, they will be the team that defines whether Contenders was good and there were still good teams there, or whether everyone went to the Overwatch League. But the reason why I wanted to reformulate this one a bit is because as you say, especially with the core, sure, there were some players in the Apex era who didn't come on this team, and obviously they added people like Hureg a bit inexplicably, but okay, they see something there. But one thing that's actually an interesting one for me, which people won't have thought of, is obviously this is a team who, by all rights, shouldn't have been in contenders. Like, a whole bunch of them had offers, they didn't want to take them, they wanted to go as a team. Not only that, it was implied they didn't just want to go as a team, but they wanted to go to the right place, and with the court, there was all these extra sort of things, demands that they had, which probably, by the fact they weren't met in season 1, were made possible by winning contenders, and therefore looking like, right, well, if you want to pick up a whole team, especially if you're an expansion team, they're the slam dunk, everyone's telling you that's the team to get if you've got the money. So it does seem as though it's not entirely the case, but we kind of get to see what would have happened if Runaway had come into the Overwatch League in that sense, because that was the team that everyone, as an entire squad, was like, they should have been in the Overwatch League, basically. Like, it should have been, yes, the other teams were all totally legit as well, but this was the only other team that had to be in as well, and wasn't actually, and was just sat in Korea. And at one point in time, people wondered, would they ever come? Because if it was really the case that they had all these demands, and so you couldn't get the individual players, I mean, if we hadn't have been in a world with expansion teams, if you look at some of the squads that kept a lot of players, maybe we wouldn't have seen these players in the Overwatch League. So I think it's a pretty cool storyline.
Yeah. The Exiles came back, and now they're here to take the throne, I guess.
Yeah. Also because there are forces within the Overwatch League that don't like bringing these narratives from other leagues over, because it might devalue the experience of the Overwatch League. So I think, yeah, this is a crispy run in many different ways.
Right. Since you outlined before, Yiska, that people are saying like Violet might end up being some like super fucking godlike player, just on paper and in terms of the changes the team has made, surely one of the teams that could make the biggest jump up from last season, I'm not counting Shanghai Dragons because they basically changed their whole team, that doesn't count in that sense. Like, if someone says, oh, this beer doesn't taste good, and you just take the beer, pour it out, and then pour fucking Coke in there, that doesn't make it, oh, yeah, this beer tastes a lot nicer now. Like, no, I'm on about teams that kept some players at least. The team that surely could be absolutely bonkers, could maybe even win the Overwatch League, is the San Francisco Shock. Because not only do they have, as you say, players people don't know like that who are supposed to be very, very good, they obviously retained a whole bunch of players, like, obviously they kept Sinatra and Super, the ones that were considered the really high quality talents, cut a whole bunch of the other players, got in players who were really good quality elsewhere, Striker from Boston Uprising, Architect from, well, he was already on the Shock, right? He just didn't play much. In theory, on paper, this looks like a fucking stacked team. Even Nevix was someone who was considered like an underrated player at times, Isn't this a team that could do a lot?
For my money, this is the third team in terms of pound for pound that just has bomb players on basically every single role with London and NYXL. I think the drop-off between that team and the next best roster, LA Gladiators is sort of close, but yeah, outside the top 4, it is a serious drop-down in pound for pound quality. And one also crucially, of course, has to consider that Krusty is now the head coach of that team and can start working and developing these players for months. And
he's got his boy Striker.
Yeah.
That is true. Yeah.
If anyone knows how to use Striker, it's got to be fucking Krusty, right? Built the whole game around the guy pretty much.
Yeah, airlifted him out of there. And the thing is, I think historically the exciting thing about Krusty is that he usually does a lot for his backline, especially for his flex support. So he has a long history of raising flex supports to a high level. Now you give him Violet, this could be crazy good. Also, from what I keep hearing, all of these Western players are absolutely competing for their slots because, and this is crucial, and it sounds like lunacy. You have this stacked roster and like all those Korean players, but you don't have a Korean main support. So what's going on there? So apparently, of course, the Koreans that already were in the team, like Architect and Choi, they apparently speak sort of serviceable English now, and they've decided to put a lot of confidence in Moth Now, you wouldn't do that unless this guy was absolutely insane. And from what I kept hearing, because this was nuts to me, I thought, okay, so of course now the main support is coming in, like this will be finalized. So I kept asking around, and everyone was telling me, no, they're not getting a new flex support from Korea. And it is because Moth is a certified genius, basically. So he is the arm of the coach and will and absolutely can morph your team into the different meta positions. So he is able to absorb basically the notes that a coach will give him, and then also sort of impact his team through shot calling. Has a good feel for when you have to be forceful or when you have to take it the pedal, like the foot off the pedal. This apparently Moth is has been an insane pickup. And that there was no question that this team was going to give them up. So in that regard, I'm sort of interested, though this is, of course, the Achilles heel of this team, that they are not calling in Korean, and that Moth might take this over. And I mean, it's a pretty big Achilles heel. But then again, the worst thing that can happen is, once again, they've shelled out for striker, and that was a big buyout fee. That team probably also would take the turn in the midseason if that doesn't work out, this English-speaking experiment. That would suck for the players like Sinatra and Nevix especially, who apparently is playing very well. But yeah, I think even if they have a bad stage one, they can easily turn it around with just one sign-up. And if you can find a serviceable shot-calling main support there that is Korean, and you can switch to Korean, I don't see how anything could necessarily go wrong with, at least from an organization point, because this is like a football manager's dream. This is like the 11th season, like you have infinite money and you're getting all the good players in basically without having the ability to buy it from your best opponents, because you're unlikely to get players from NYXL in London, because they look at your roster and say, okay, we can't sell to them, otherwise we will have too big of a problem. And in that regard, like their DPS are absolutely stacked. Tank line is like the main tank is the one question mark, but Violet is the biggest prodigy on that role that could come in for flex support. And then, okay, main support is another thing. But yeah, in that regard, that team is absolutely stacked. I think we have a new super team in the Overwatch League.
I'd love to know what the rules are on this, because it surely must technically be possible as long as the transfer window is open. I'm waiting for the first team to be so gangster that in the position you're talking about that the Shock's in, the way they get a baller-ass player is they basically just do a sick deal where they get a shit team to get the player from the really good team, and they instantly trade right back. Maybe even just make it look convincing, make it 2 weeks, and then you just trade straight for him. And it was actually your plan all along. But at that point in time, it's joke's on you, trying to sell to the shit teams, but not me. I will get this player no matter what. Sadly, no one really no one's using fucking anime level plot lines when they're making teams. Unfortunately, they're all just trying to do it straight up like a good guy. I'll pick the best player is available. It's you sad naive person. Do you know the point of being alive is to be ridiculous? It's the point of just being a normal person. I didn't do that. Who would you pick, stuchiu, as a team who would fit this builder? Like a team that has potentially got a big jump up. Who do you think that would fit that narrative?
You look around.
Did you say Shanghai, your favorites?
No, dude, it's not a jump up. They literally burned everything to the fucking ground. And then
okay then. Do you think that is a basically
do I think that's a good team?
Do they actually get good from scrapping everything, just keep one player?
Well, they kept 3 players, and that's the problem.
Sure, but I mean, yeah. Oh, you're right. Yes, obviously.
Yeah, they'll get better just by virtue of the fact that they were literally they set the bar for most terrible performance across all of esports history. Literally, I researched this. There's literally nobody else who's ever done worse than they have. Pound for pound, dollar for dollar, loss for loss, literally.
It's also because almost every other format in history had relegation.
Yeah.
So everyone else like this is the equivalent of in combat sports where you can throw in the towel, and then this is just like the coach who was like, nah, if he dies, it's like basically they had fucking that guy out of like Rocky, just like Ivan Drago as the coach, like if he dies, he dies. It's like, well, he died, so let's get a new guy in here. So
yeah, and like I rarely watch Shanghai Dragons games because they were so trash at the beginning and they continue to be trash. But the few times I did, I remember Fearless and Gaguri not being very good with each other, and they're still on there. So I'm like, why would I believe in this team? Like maybe Guardian is good. I'm not exactly sure. So yeah, maybe they're better, but just the fact that like, I will say this, like, you know how people learn from their mistakes over time? Technically speaking, they've made every single mistake in the book.
Yeah.
So surely that must point them to the opposite direction of what they've done.
So they're using the most basic trial and error method possible of like, if we do everything wrong, eventually we've got to get to the right thing. The key is just keep changing. Don't do things wrong and then just keep doing things wrong. Keep changing and eventually you get there.
Yeah, they got rid of everybody. So, I mean, technically it's working.
Yiska, is this team actually going to be good? Or is this another example, as you said with the Florida Mayhem, of like, it's not, you know, when we told you guys to get Koreans, like, you was meant to listen to part 2 of that, which is like, you know, go and scout this person for Runaway and this person for like Element Biscuit. We didn't literally just mean get some who's got a Korean passport. Like, is this actually better than it seems on paper?
I mean, theoretically, this is the much of KDP, and KDP is basically like, if you look at the contenders final against Runaway, I think they should have won that. I think they weren't the best team in the season, but that final looked almost backed. Now, the crucial part for me is they didn't get the crown jewel of that team, which is Decay, that went to Los Angeles Gladiators. So all the other parts, of course, have to be quality. I think there's no way this is even the bottom third team.
Okay.
They should probably make it into at least the play-ins. I think that's realistic for them. So 12th to 8th spot is probably something where they will land.
Would it be harsh to say that this is a downgraded version of that team, though, because of the players that they had to keep? And you think it's better?
No, it's a downgraded version.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a bit depressing then.
I mean, what it did do, though, is to free up Decay for a team like LA Gladiators, who I think now have a very interesting mix, who could be, in terms of, like, it depends on the coaching, but they could, for instance, do what Fusion did easily last season with a hybrid core. Yes, that also worked because of Fissure. I think they could play a much more flexible style that is not necessarily about, one star player, but also the thing is, and that is, it's a weird situation where one of the most popular players in the Overwatch League is potentially also an underrated player in Shore4, who, if you at least look at his stats, he was a nuts player in terms of the Western scene last season, but he isn't,
especially in the last stages, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, this guy especially, it always seems like he needs that second guy on his team that just, it's like, okay, I'm the best in this small pond. Oh, there's another fish, so let's grow together, so to speak, right? And Decay is absolutely that player. I think Decay just okay, his hero pool is interesting because he can play Genji and Tracer, even though that's not really that relevant in the current meta, but I think it will be over the season. And then he also has a very, very good Zarya. So in that regard, they are set in the department of GOATs there. And yeah, I think Shore4, if they can grow alongside each other and there's no, dramatic revelations in the playoff series once again or later in the season, then yeah, I think Gladiators could also be a very good team.
Okay. Right. What about this, stuchiu? Here's one that's more of an abstract. It's not necessarily specifically a team or a lineup. What about this one? So there are all the expansion teams that have never had a squad before. There are players who never played in season 1. So basically, the freshmen have to compete against the sophomores. Do the sophomores have a big edge because they played in the Overwatch League? Because I know the format changed slightly, but they have a sense of what it's like perhaps to live abroad, to be in the league. Is that actually going to affect who wins? I mean, I guess this ties into broader ideas about esports in general, of what you think about like new teams and like established cores and stuff. So what would your take on that be?
There's certainly an edge, but I want to call it a definitive edge. Like, here's the weird thing about esports, I guess, is like everybody seems to talk about like harmony and like organization and all that happiness shit, but like if you start looking at like a bunch of like the successful teams in the past, a lot of them were fractional, a lot of them were argumentative, a lot of them were in shit situations that made zero sense as to why they did so well. And so I think at the end of the day, like the primary win condition is always going to be based off of the skill of the players you have, the team identity you have, and then like does that like combination of all the different factors allow you to win? Because there are certain players and certain teams that do better in like weird situations or like bad situations or fractional situations. Like Newbie did punch each other and then they went on to win TI4. Like that did happen, right? Like that's why I think it will be an advantage, but like where I go against it is like the way people talk about it is it's as if it will be a definitive advantage. I think it'll be based off case by case, and that's something I can't know.
Okay.
What is the usual, like if you think back, for instance, to League of Legends is probably one of the more the most comparable ones to Overwatch. Like the championship winning teams, are those rookie fueled, or are those mostly made up of players that have been like a year in their respective leagues, or 2 years, or what's the trend there?
The problem is in League of Legends, it's mainly based on things like first of all, to some degree, I'll remove Korea from the equation, because unfortunately in Korea, obviously we all know it is possible to every season get a crop of rookies who are fucking amazing and could just totally turn your team around, and who no one could know how good this person will be, but they don't just become good, they become like, like third best player in the world at their role or something outrageous like that. So that will obviously skew that entirely, because you really, some 17-year-old kid can just hop ahead of a mad veteran. But if you want to talk about the LCS, so the Western regions, I would say there has been a lot of consistency with veterans who are really good and have been proven playoff performers, having incredible consistency in terms of success, and people who actually have talent and could, off ability, make it one day, struggling early on, or having to sort of adapt to aspects that have nothing to do with the game, of like, what's it like to play a whole load of scrims, lose your games in the LCS, then have someone say, right, come back in 2 days and do it all again. It's like, fuck, we don't get a break. We don't ever get like a time off. We can't change your player. Like, we have to just start all like some mad Sisyphean nightmare, like there's a lot of that does happen, like I feel like in the LCS, if I had to make a general rule, rookies are feast or famine to me. They either completely break for all of the external reasons, or they're so absurdly good that the external reasons can't hold them back, but I'm sure on some minor level still affect them. Meanwhile, the guys who, this ties into the Overwatch League example, I guess, the guys who are like the very good players who are veterans, one of the reasons why you can almost bank on that guy is because as much as, his skill could fall off and he might have to regain his form and, his place in the meta, the one thing you can rely upon with that guy is because he's been through so many seasons and he's had different teammates and he's had different coaches and he's won the league and he's come third in the league and lost in heartbreaking fashion. He understands what the game's like, as in the game of being a League of Legends pro. Like, he knows what it's like to do badly in week 2, but get it together on week 7 and then go in the playoffs and do well. He knows what it's like to be under, an underdog, but then just play your best in the big game and maybe you can win. Like, all these things that, like, they're kind of like the veteran secrets you have to learn, and you can't really be granted these out of nowhere. You can have skill, certainly, you can hit the league running, but these little extra elements, which feel to me like they would be summarized under the umbrella of sort of like veteran savvy, are really key. Like, I'll give you one great example, because it's one of the most enduring in League of Legends, which would be the player Soaz, who previously played for Fnatic and Origen, but currently now he's just joined the team Misfits in the LEC, which is the former name for the ULCS. This is a player who literally, like, if you wanted to write a book on how to peak in a tournament, he would be the player you would have write it. Because almost every season of this guy's career, no matter how good his team was, and to be fair, he has had a lot of good teams and teammates, even if he was playing career worst form, he knew how to, like, when to start the heavy practice, when to start doing something drastic if it's not working, when to, like, figure out how to up your level of play. And in doing so, he actually did it almost in a cynical manner of knowing, like, I can't just go 100% from day one of the league every single year, because that is going to burn me out. It's going to wreck me. It's going to, like, emotionally drain. Like, he kind of, like, understood kind of how to, like, bob and weave, as it were, as a boxer, as well as throw punches. You know, he wasn't a guy who just threw punches, and if I don't knock you out, you punch my face in because I don't have any defensive skills. He kind of like knew when to put his foot on the gas pedal, he used that and when to take it off and when to cruise a little bit, you know. So I feel like some of that will carry over. As you say, it's case by case, but I'm going to go ahead and bet that, for example, this is actually one area, by the way, where I'll go ahead and give you a controversial topic, Yiska. This is one area where I could see some Western players, if they figured this out and are veterans, getting a slight edge over Koreans. Because unfortunately, Koreans don't really use that mentality. They really do have the thing of, like, we're going to put the gas pedal down from day one. We're supposed to win every game. And if we don't, either you have now failed as a player or it's time to get a replacement in. So that's one area where, listen, like, to be fair, on season 2, that might not be enough, but that's one area where I'm interested to see how the Overwatch League does develop, actually, because obviously we saw in season 1 a lot of burnout, a lot of team turnover, player turnover. Sure, meta was related to it, but I would even say you can't use that as an excuse, because as I said with the Swords example, the meta becomes part of knowing this. Like, for example, you have to know when you're in a bad meta and it's not a meta that fits your team, not to get crushed and not to give up and not to go, it's fucking over, isn't it? And go, you know, but guess what? The same hand that took away from you can give you in 3 weeks when the patch changes, for all we know, you know. That could be a very, very interesting one, even though it's not as kind of broad stroke one. It's more like going to be player by player and team by team, I feel.
Yeah.
It's true that, like, if you think about the emotional aspect, a lot of people do go, like, all in on the first day. As a rookie, they're like, this is live or die. And then in actuality, it's not live or die. It's just like, it's just another day. And then it becomes live or die once you get to the playoffs. So that's not something I really thought about, but it does certainly apply here.
Yeah, I mean, I also have the idea or the feeling that a lot of coaches communicate that idea to players, that it is live or die, and that you are competing against your, for instance, if you're double stacked on a role, that you're at least competing against your direct teammate, but that it's also, that the pacing idea, even though that's interesting, that it was the Korean team that, you know, supposedly sandbagged and took the foot off the pedal just for a while, and you know,
maybe didn't execute it as well, as well as it could.
They
wait that one sec. Some idiot's calling me. Fucking hell! So it's literally because it's Discord, it's making the sound as well. Wait that one sec.
So that's one of the very important questions that we will solve or have to answer through season 2 is how important is experience in the at the end, because currently a lot of expansion teams valued experience sort of highly. I think the majority, or I'm not sure if there's actually an expansion team that didn't bring in veterans. I think everyone had. And to see how that works out, it's also, Overwatch is interesting in the sense, okay, what we do have is the first generation pro players are being forced out. Like almost all the guys that used to be world class are no longer. Some of them are not even in the Overwatch League anymore. And that is a question to ask. Also, if you look at the age graph in the Overwatch League, I'm not sure what it is in League of Legends, but I think the oldest team, for instance, and by a good margin, is Outlaws at 24, but most teams are like around 21.
As an average age?
Yes.
That's actually pretty old. Like, if I had to guess, I would say most top teams would have an average age. I'm obviously having to pull this out of my arse by thinking about how old the players are off the top of my head in the top team. I would say the average age of top teams is probably like 21, maybe even younger for some of the Korean teams, you know.
Yeah, 21 is like, I think the lowest is 20.2 or something, if I remember correctly. And then the average is actually 22 or something in the Overwatch League. But at the same time, it might just be that because the game is so young that the Generation 1 players are being forced out. At the same time, it is possible that, for instance, that players that are still young still don't arrive at the Overwatch League in pristine condition. And that is a big question mark. For instance, some of the people that have watched Contenders Korea last season said Huxel is not the carry Haxal that he once was for his team.
Right.
Flower is a big question mark there. We like he was not even playing for XL2 for most of the time. So what is it that is, or what is it about Overwatch, I guess this season could answer, that maybe forces out players? Or is it some fatigue that they feel over the game? Or is that something that players can overcome? And veteran status is actually very valuable and should be considered in team building in the future at all points. That's a big one, I think, for me. Because also in evaluating these rosters at the moment, right? Because, so for instance, a team like the Toronto Defiant have Neko, have Envy, and Asher. Now, Asher is one of the probably lower half players in terms of his role in season 1. But is that veteran status enough? Can he like share some experiences with his fellow players that there is value for a player even this bad to be incorporated into a roster? That's a big question mark for me. So we will see that like this is basically an answer that this season will have to give, even though it's not as satisfying, simply because we scaled down from the grind of 40 games to 28. So there's a format change there. Though at the same time, if we're looking at the format changes, for instance, for the stage playoffs or for the final seasons, I think there might be something about stamina in there, simply because we're playing more playoff matches now.
This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want to see some teasers? See who's going to be the next guest on one of my shows? Maybe you want to take part in an esports discussion with me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.